we joined SaaStock a little while ago and are part of their founder circles. It's been absolutely brilliant for us. We first came into it to further our community, our reach, our network, and to learn from some of the world-class speakers that SaaStock has come and speak. And I have to say, it has been absolutely superb for us.
Welcome to the SaaS Revolution Show. Christian Owens, CEO of Paddle, and Patrick Campbell, Chief Strategy Officer of Paddle. I think it's the first
Captain Strategy. I like this little question there. Captain Strategy is the actual target name, but yeah, Chief Strategy Officer.
Captain Strategy. All right. So, well, guys, like first time I think we've had you on the podcast together. There's obviously a reason for that. It's been a big month for both of you. Christian, you raised a little bit of money earlier this month, and Patrick, somebody bought Profitwell. So let's just talk about that a little bit. So Christian, what happened at the beginning of the month? You raised the Series D, is that right?
We did. We raised Series D of $200 million from KKR. It's been a very interesting time to raise money just in the world. So excited that we got that done.
Yeah, and then
awesome.
Part of that was used to buy Profitwell. And so we have joined Paddle publicly as of this week. And it's been a fun ride so far.
Congratulations. Well, to both of you, as you said, Christian, the markets are very strange, probably an understatement. So to raise, it's very difficult to raise in these times. At the moment, I probably didn't think we'd be saying in these times since COVID, but we've got these weird times at the moment. And then you've gone and spent a bunch of it, not all of it, but pretty much the acquisition price for Profitwell was exactly what you've raised. And yeah, let's focus. So we could probably do a whole episode on raising a Series D round of 200 million in these times, in these strange times. But we'll focus on the M&A today and on this announcement that you did this week about buying Profitwell for $200 million. So did you already spend all of the money, or how much of that 200 million has gone on Profitwell?
Well, it was not an all cash deal. It was a cash and equity deal. Basically, Christian wants to make sure that this is my prison now. No, that was too rough. No, Christian wants to make sure that obviously we're incentivized. And I think the upside, that was a really big piece of why we want to go to Paddle, is just in terms of like what that equity is going to be worth in the next 3, 4, 5 years. And into the next decade, I would argue, just based on the shifts happening in the world of SaaS and us riding that particular shift, I think better than anyone else. And so, yeah, I'm pretty excited.
Yeah. And for us, it was really, it's coincidental that the two numbers are the same, sort of rather than anything deliberate. Kind of for us, it was important that one kind of Patrick and the Profitwell team from a cash perspective felt like that they've been working on this thing for 10 years. So it was important that was a component of the deal. And it was also important that sort of we wanted to build something together over the next several years. So that equity piece was a huge portion of the deal as well. So it's a split. We're not disclosing the split, but kind of Paddle and the combined business is sort of really well capitalized sort of now for the next several years for us to be able to go and execute.
So 200 is not your favorite number. It was just a coincidence. So.
No, it's my favorite number this month.
Yeah, it seems to be. Good stuff. Let's start at the beginning then. How did this happen? Who approached who? Were you in the lift together at the Paddle office and said, why don't we get together? Like, how did it start?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it really started, I would argue, 6 years ago?
Yeah, 5 or 6.
Yeah, Christian, we had come to London to interview Christian and a number of other folks for some of our content. And I think what was really interesting is that where this really comes from is alignment of both vision and values. I think that's a really big thing that not a lot of people think about when it comes to M&A, because there are M&A, activities that occur where it's just kind of all about the money, all about EBITDA, these types of things. For this one, it was very much we weren't looking to sell, but we were looking for someone that, had the same vision and we could kind of continue going. And 6 years ago when I had interviewed Christian, literally leaving the office, I called Facundo, our head of product, and was like, there was like two parts of the conversation. One of them, I don't know if you know, but one of the parts of the conversation was like, this is the first person I've met in this space who thinks like us. And thinks like us is like very what we call do it for you at Paddle, which is basically like, we believe that like when we build a retention product, we do it for you in terms of retention. When we build like a billing product for tax, these types of things, we do it for you, that kind of concept. And then the other part was if I was like, Faku, if we ever thought we were going to go into billing, we need to go into billing now because he's going to fucking build it before we're going to get there. And so, yeah, that was the big thing. And then more practically, basically fall of last year, we knew we were going to have to raise money into 2022. And Christian kind of got in front and was like, well, what if we join forces? And it was something that we had to kind of like take a week or two to like even just kind of internalize if we emotionally could do that. And thankfully we could. And yeah, the rest is history, near history at least.
I guess also just to clarify for those non-native English speakers that are listening, because we've got a global audience, Patrick is not saying "fuck you." He's saying his co-founder is called Facu, right?
Yeah.
Facundo.
It's Facundo.
Yeah.
He's Argentinian.
Yeah.
Facu. The Irish folks say it in a very, very unique way. So yeah, like it's Facu, to people who are from Ireland. So, anyways, yeah, it's Facu.
Okay. All right. I don't know whether you're swearing me or not, but we'll move on. And Patrick, but you bootstrapped for 10 years. So why sell now? Like, why is the time now? And maybe the second part of it, like, can we actually get you on the bootstrapping stage at SaaStock this year? Like, is that still okay?
It's the last
time.
People
throw eggs at you.
The last time I'm allowed to be on that stage probably this year. No, I think like for us, it was, we were having too many, and I think a bootstrap company, when you run into the problem where you're having too many $10,000 arguments, like you're having too many arguments about like, oh, there's these 5 things we can do. They all, require funding and we just don't have it because we're writing, our cash flows. That's the point where you have to either, hey, we're going to be a very profitable business and we're going to run it that way. And that's going to be very intentional, or we have to go raise money. And for us, it was very like, who could possibly have a similar vision of us of like, not building product where the user has to do the work, but building product where like it's just done for you. Like who else has that vision? And thankfully, like, we knew the guy and we knew the people in the space who had that. And that was, that was kind of where it came of like, oh, our work is going to have more multiplicative effect joining forces than like staying it alone. And it got to the point where we were like, well, if we wanted to stay alone at this point, it would just be ego. And, it's never great to make, I think, big decisions off ego.
I would say as well, like in addition to that kind of meeting in London where we filmed some content, I'd say SaaStock probably plays a reasonable part in kind of why this happened. I think over the last like 2 years, us sort of spending time together has been more intentional. Like it's been like, oh, I'm going to go to Boston, or like we're in the city or whatever. I think before that, for like the 3 years after kind of Patrick came to London, basically we would, the week a year that we would spend sort of like talking about this kind of thing in the future and just hanging out was in Dublin. So I think that's probably, it's not necessarily where the deal happened, but I don't think the deal would have happened if we didn't sort of spend time together at those SaaStock events.
Yeah. So you got to hit Christian up for your carry, Alex. That's what he's trying to say.
Well, yeah, somebody did say that last night when I was having dinner, and I was, it's a discussion to be had.
Who said that?
One of my EO forum buddies, but yeah. So, but I assume so. Like you started the conversation. Like, okay, like why don't we become one company, or why don't we acquire like Profitwell? But PC, I assume then, like, whilst the vision, the values, you like Christian, you can see you guys working together. But I assume it wasn't the only company that you spoke to, right? You probably have to do the diligent thing. So, did you go out to market? Who else did you speak with? How did that help with negotiations and with the price?
You're asking me about who I dated before marrying Christian here. No, I think I'll say that we spoke to all the obvious parties, And I think what was kind of cool about it was, I think when you're building, and it doesn't really matter if you're bootstrapped or venture backed or whatever, like it always feels like everything's terrible. Like you suck. Like, I mean, it depends on your personality, but for us, building, it was like, we're never pretty, we're never great, everything's terrible. And then it was like, oh, like we have some value, like we didn't even realize, right? Because I think that's the thing that, like, you know, if I was doing this over again, I think we would have had a little bit more of like a focused M&A kind of just strategy, like over the years. Even, and some of the best advice I got after all of this was, yeah, like going forward, like you should have a slide on your board deck that basically is like, here are the people that like are potential acquirers. Here are potential people you can acquire. Even if you don't have a relationship with them, here's the status of that, just to kind of think through it, because we ran into this like very reactive, like it was kind of, you described this about fundraising, where it's like all of a sudden like, oh my God, I'm in a process. Like I didn't even realize it until you've been talking to someone for a few weeks. And so that's kind of how it was with us. But yeah, it was definitely a very huge learning experience, and I'm glad I went to.
Can you shed some light? You know, how long did the process take? And are you able to break it down for the listeners and viewers into steps? Like, what are the key things you had to do on the sell side? And then Christian, same question for you on the buy side. Maybe like what were some of the key things that you had to go through?
I can talk buy side first, because we probably started the process a little bit earlier. Sort of probably July, August time, we started kind of talking about it, thinking about it. This is last year. And then kind of, I think the first time I kind of set up, I just like randomly dropped a Zoom call onto Patrick's calendar, probably sometime in October. And sort of my goal of that was like literally just put the idea in his head, because like it's a kind of thing that you have to think about for a few weeks. And then I think I flew to Boston November.
Yeah.
So I flew to Boston November. We got Faku there, and sort of and kind of Patrick came in, and sort of we basically spent 2 days in a room, just the three of us. Kind of, I don't think either side had decided like whether they wanted to do it or not, and it was more of a like, let's get every possible piece of information out
On the table.
And then Patrick can probably give the next phase.
Yeah, and so then Faku, Peter, and I basically had a, would we even be willing to do this kind of like a thing? And then what I think a lot of people don't realize is like it's so like spectrum and gray, because it's like, yeah, at a certain value we would do, of course we would sell, right? But what ends up happening, and this is some really good advice we got from Christopher O'Donnell, who's on our board, which was like, take all the potential acquirers and then like what's the like basically like what's the value you'd sell to them, right? And so there are certain like folks that like the stock is liquid, so it's a little bit more obvious to like see, you know, where that would be. There's other folks where it's like, you could not pay us enough to go work there, but there is a number, so the number is, you know, X plus a bunch, right? And so that was like a really interesting exercise. And then it was like, it's almost spits out an expected value formula, right? Because then you can add like culture fit or perceived culture fit, you know, those types of things. And all of a sudden it spits out like, you know, what that valuation would need to be. And then there's kind of like a convergence, you know, around, you know, that of like who the potential parties are. And so I think it's kind of funny because like this both obviously started with Paddle and ended with Paddle. But I think what was really interesting is in the middle, you know, we talked to a bunch of people, and we talked to a bunch of like folks that we really admire, which I think is really cool. And you talk to them and they like you like them, and that's kind of awesome. But I think at the end of the day, it was, you know, going out, having all those conversations. I was actually going to take the entire month of January off. That was something that was decided like, you know, basically in June of last year. And then it was like, that's not happening. Yeah. But yeah, so I would say to make that practical, December, talked to a bunch of folks, flew out here to have like more conversations with Paddle. And then basically everything kind of came to a head at the worst time ever, which was the week before Christmas through the first week of January. Yeah, like we were stalling mildly because we needed to get a little more information from like one last party before like making a final decision. And then we planned on basically signing the term sheet on a Monday, but we had not brought in our like core team yet. Like some of them knew that there was stuff going on, but like we would not have made a decision by like fiat, like just the founder or just the execs like making a decision. We brought in about 10 people, gave them all the options, gave them all the information, and then we're like, all right, we're going to walk away. You guys debate this and come back to us with what you think we should do. And then no matter what you think, we are going to take the opposite side and like debate it. So we spent about 8 hours together that Sunday. And then at the end, it was Paddle. So.
Yeah. And then I think we signed a term sheet officially January 10th-ish?
Yeah, somewhere around there. Yeah.
And then kind of sort of two things started. Like we started doing our diligence on Profitwell, which was a fun process. And I'd say that's probably another learning that we've like discussed after this for like since this happened for the bootstrappers is if it is ever your intention to sell the business at some point,
start early,
like operationally start early, like kind of have all the stuff in order, like make sure kind of from a like finance perspective, you're kind of running stuff, make sure you're keeping kind of records of things. It's not like that with Profitwell, those things didn't exist.
A lot of them did not exist.
So but it's like if, this person left and they're in a Dropbox account that they had, we know that we have them, but it's sort of like they're not super organized or like whatever.
Here's what to do once you're at product market fit, and you can define that however you want. Let's say you're doing $1 million a year. Let's say you're doing 100,000 a year, but you're indie. Go to a lawyer who's involved in M&A and say, what do I need to do to, quote, prep the company for sale? That's what you need to do. Those are like some key words, because what he or she will tell you is basically like, oh, we need to get your operating docs in order. Hey, put all these PDFs in one place. Like we had heard prep the company for sale, and we had talked about that like a couple years ago, but we didn't get lawyers involved because, lawyers cost money, and like lawyers do cost money for a reason. They cost a lot of money, as we found out. But I think it's one of those things like that would have been helpful, or that would have saved some pain in the DD process kind of going forward.
Yeah. It's also like one of those things where money spent then would have been money saved now. Like orders of magnitude.
Sure.
Like money. It's kind of, you spend 20 grand back then to get the stuff in order.
200 grand now.
Sort of, and it's 10x that when you actually kind of like the additional kind of fees that you end up paying kind of when it's about sort of finding things or kind of cleaning things up. And then from that kind of term sheet and sort of starting the diligence process, I went out to raise money. So I kicked that process off probably towards the end of January. Spent a couple of weeks pulling together a deck and kind of materials and things like that, which was interesting because like January things were still pretty good market wise in January, or we were on the precipice.
We should have signed the term sheet a week before.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Yeah.
And so I kind of kicked that off basically end of January, early February. Kind of had a list of people who I'd known for years that I wanted to speak to. There was sort of, and then we kind of added a bunch of people to that list, sort of that could probably do a transaction this size that we'd never really had a relationship with. Because a lot of the funds, they can write a $100 million, $200 million check, but it's a stretch for them. So there was this whole new group of people who writing a $200 million check was the small stuff like that they do. And those people I didn't necessarily have a relationship with. So kind of there was quite a few people on that list where actually we were kind of like, this is the first or second call that I was ever having with them. And maybe I'd met them at an event or kind of been for coffee. That was a very intense process. We basically I made a decision, and it kind of comes back to the thing that Patrick said earlier of like finding yourself in a process. That's basically how I've found myself raising money in the past. Like you start talking to a couple of people, and then you talk to a couple of people like the next week, and you talk to a couple of people the next week. And then suddenly you have a cohort of investors that you're talking to that are 2 weeks more progressed in their thinking than the latest people that you spoke to. And it kind of causes sort of issues of like, you get a term sheet and then someone's 3 weeks away from giving you a term sheet because they have more work to do. So I made the very deliberate decision to say, I'm going to block out a week and I'm going to do like 50 meetings in the week. and I'm going to give everybody the same set of information at the beginning of the week, and give everybody the same set of information at the end of the week. And then sort of we can decide who we want to proceed with from there. That was definitely the most intense week of my life. It was like 18 plus hour days of like kind of 18 hours of calls.
Yeah.
Of like you can
Riding
get up
time zones. Yeah.
Yeah, you can get up to go to the bathroom and get a glass of water and pretty much nothing else. But kind of at the end of that week, we had sort of then a group of people that we wanted to take forward, and sort of we went through that process, and I think we signed, I can't remember exactly when we signed term sheet, probably it was pretty close to the 1st of April, I want to say.
The term sheet?
With the investors.
That was
sorry.
earlier.
It was
that was
March.
Signing.
It was sort of it was mid-March, and then we kind of got to like final sort of everything kind of in April.
I think it was doesn't matter. It was a little earlier, but yeah.
And then I can't actually remember when we actually officially signed everything. We closed both deals at the same time.
Oh, that's right. So there was a split there. Yeah, we signed like April 8th-ish speaks. It's funny, like that date's so important to you up until then, and then afterwards you're just like, I have no idea when that was. But yeah.
Do you think, I mean, just quickly on the fundraise, then do you think if you started the process now, it's for listeners, viewers, it's the 27th of May. Do you think if you started that and wanted to raise 200 million now, do you think that would have gone through, like given where the markets are?
I honestly think that the timing on this was perfect for two reasons. I think if we'd started maybe a month or two earlier, the fundraise, so that we raised $200 million at like a $1.4 billion valuation. I think if we'd done it 2 months earlier, it probably would have been like a $4 billion valuation.
Yeah.
And that sounds great, but like
it handicaps
you. That would be a valuation that we now have to like really grow into. And I think if we tried to do it now, it would be not impossible, but it would be very difficult, I think, given the fundraising environment and the amount of money that we were raising. It'd be very difficult to get that done. Mostly because I think a lot of these large late stage crossover kind of type funds have sort of excluded themselves from the market for a while.
Yeah.
So I think sort of it would have been particularly tricky, I think, even for them to entertain those conversations. I think this transaction was a little bit special in that obviously some of the kind of funds were being used for to do a deal and to kind of grow the combined business. And I think that there are a bunch of funds who would still do that deal because they understand it. But there was definitely a marked difference during that process between the funds who have been around for 4 or 5 years, and they've come up over what has been one of the greatest bull markets in history, and they've never really invested through a period of any kind of downturn. And then folks like KKR, who we raised from, who have been doing this for decades, and they've seen every possible kind of boom bust cycle, and they recognize that the way to run their business is to keep investing kind of through it. And maybe the market changes and some of the terms change and things like that, but sort of that is how they run their business. So there was a distinct like two groups of people. And I think that one of those groups of people, i.e. the people who have seen it before, are still doing deals. But actually there's a lot of funds and people who've come out of bigger funds they've been around for 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah. I think the big thing to keep in mind is like great companies are going to get funded in any cycle. It's just the terms or the valuations may be like not as crazy as they were like a year or two ago, which I don't know. There's a huge debate of whether that's good or bad or whatever it is. I think like right now, what we're seeing in the market is a lot of companies like, again, if we would have raised at a $3.5 billion valuation or something like that, like, it's hard to grow into it. It's really hard to grow into something that like, feels good for an announcement, but isn't necessarily great, going forward.
Especially when you look at public markets right now and sort of like the mean, like kind of revenue multiple where we're trading at right now is like 5.3x sort of
in the market,
revenue.
Yeah.
And we went up to like 17x in the public markets over the last sort of 12 months, 24 months. But if you extend that chart backwards, like the historical average is about 5 to 6 times revenue. Like It's not like it being 5 times now is sort of the aberration. It was the period of 24 months ago where it was 17x that was.
Yeah.
So obviously if you raise a much higher multiple and the multiple maintains in the future to be 5, 6, 7 times revenue, like you have to grow into that kind of valuation.
Yeah.
On the acquisition side, what was the hardest part of getting the deal done? Was there ever a moment where you thought the deal would fall apart? And did conversations ever get heated, or was it just, was it nice and rosy all the way through?
I think there were probably several moments where I didn't think there was ever a moment where it was like, oh, this is all going to completely blow up.
Yeah.
But I think there were several moments where it was like, there's a lot of moving pieces, and are we actually going to be able to square everything and get it done? I think as we kind of progressed through that process, I think the sort of, it's like for all of the people who build software like on this, it's sort of when you start building something, you have a fairly clear idea of what it's gonna, how complex it's gonna be in your mind, like when you start building it. And then as you build it, you kind of go up this curve, and suddenly like everything's getting more complex and more complex and more complex and more complex as you progress through it. And at some point you hit a kind of a point in the process where you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Like, you know what the finish line looks like. But until that, kind of everything is increasing in complexity and sort of decreasing in certainty that these things are going to happen until you actually kind of have a full picture of what's going on. So I think we probably went into the process naively.
Yeah, 100%.
Being like, okay, this is fairly simple.
We already did the hard part.
Yeah,
so.
like we've negotiated the price. That's the difficult bit. We just need to do some documentation now.
Yeah.
And actually, we were completely wrong. Like, the work began at that point, and then it was probably sort of a month of that getting sort of much more complex.
Well, and then you think that, so there's 2 big processes that at least we encountered. I think it's pretty common. You have the diligence part, and then you have kind of like the term or the agreement. So you get through diligence, which is kind of like painful, and you're like, oh, there's only like 4 weeks till close. Like, we're kind of done, right? Like, this is all like, we're past this. And it's like, no, the agreement then becomes like, and you don't even read it. And that sounds scary, but like, it's like 100 pages plus 100 pages of disclosures, right? And the lawyers, you're literally going back and forth on like every bullet, and it's stuff that like we don't even know. And so like mostly not stuff we don't know, but it's like you have to make decisions on, okay, what does this mean? Well, it means this. No. Explain it to me like I'm a 2-year-old. And then what is the implication here, right? And that's why, like I was telling him, it was like, I would love to do this like over again, just in the sense of, because I kind of know what's coming, and then I can kind of like, one, help, tame some of the anxiety of like, well, is this normal? Is it not normal? Because I didn't know if some requests were normal, or some lawyers being a little, chippy was normal, those types of things. Yeah, I don't think there was any, I think both groups were very earnest. Like, once we decided on the term sheet, we were like everyone was in. Everyone was like trying to make this happen. There were just lawyers doing their jobs of like, oh, this is terrible. Oh, that teal term is not good. Like, all that kind of stuff that had to be dealt with, essentially.
That's how they make their money.
Yeah, lawyers always win.
And the purchase now means that, I guess, kind of Paddle has a revenue of almost 100 million ARR. You're kind of like on that track, right?
I like your Latka impression. Your Latka impression is really good. You can speculate whatever revenue is that you'd like.
Yeah. And then, but with regards to like IPO, didn't 100 million used to be a kind of like a good benchmark of when people would IPO? But what is it now? Is it like 300 million, 200? Like,
I think it's somewhere between.
Depends on the market, right?
Yeah, like, I think in this market, who knows?
No one now.
Yeah, I would not want to be taking a company public right now. But in this market, I would say it's probably somewhere between 200 and 400 million. But I think it depends on a lot of things. It depends on, like, are you true SaaS? What do the gross margins look like? Are you profitable? Sort of, what's the growth rate?
I think it also depends on like Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think like net revenue retention is probably one of the most important kind of public SaaS metrics if you look at Snowflake and others right now.
Yeah, I think it's just also like, where's the market going to go? Like, people are keeping their companies private longer and longer because there's a lot of advantages to that. In this new market, like especially going in the next couple of years, if you take a really bearish case, there might be a reason to go public, right? Because private markets might actually get harder. I don't think that'll be the case, but I don't know. It'll just be really weird to see how it evolves over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Onto the fun things, just conscious of time. Patrick, first thing you purchased after the money hit your bank?
I have a gratuitous thing I purchased, but I actually don't know. I'm not like a car guy. I'm not like oh my God, like literally
holiday.
Literally the Monday after the money hit the account, I was like working 15 hours. So it's just like, yeah, it's no, I did buy, I will say, here's a fun thing, a nice little clip. I bought a egregiously expensive coffee grinder. It's a work of art, and that's how I justify it to myself. I like over-engineered things. But yeah, there's no plans to buy any fancy things or anything like that, except for obviously a fancy coffee grinder.
Yeah.
And we've obviously known each other since, I think, pre-SaaStock 2016. From what I know about you, I think you like colder climates than warmer climates. But I understand you're moving to Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
And like, is it for the weather? You know, why would you be moving there?
Yeah, I like when you answer questions you know the answer to. I know it's for the pod, but it's fun. So there's a couple of reasons. So one, I've only ever lived in cold climates, and my better half and I, we've always talked about living in like a warmer climate at some point, or at least testing it out. Or, you know, it's like when you're dreaming as a couple, you're always like, oh, it'd be really cool to have a place in a warm climate, a place in a cold climate. You know, basically we all are like, we become snowbirds over time, just really early in life. And so when this was going through, Paddle's a remote company, we started thinking about like, are we going to stay in Utah? What are we going to do? And basically, you know, started talking to lawyers, and lawyers were like, oh, there's this Puerto Rican Act 60, which is basically a tax incentive program. And so we started looking at Puerto Rico, visited a number of times, and then kind of decided like, yeah, let's do this, at least for the next few years. We're getting into kid territory, and so we don't have to worry about schools quite yet, that type of a thing. And so, yeah, moving to Puerto Rico, going to be splitting my time basically between there and Utah, and then obviously events and all kinds of fun stuff.
Christian, you filmed the whole thing, the whole sort of process in terms of acquiring Profitwell, turned it into a documentary. We Sign Tomorrow, I believe this is WeSignTomorrow.com.
Yep.
Tell us about that. You know, why did you do it, and did you ever regret having the cameras there like all the time as you were going through?
Short answer is yes. I can say that. Yeah.
Well, also, like a lot of this was like on Zoom as well. So sort of a lot of it, we were able to kind of record Zoom calls and voice chats and kind of voice memos and things like that. And then sort of had the cameras around as well. I don't think I regretted having the cameras there. I think like looking back on it, I think at the time I was like, this is like literally, I can think of doing nothing worse than sort of having somebody follow me around with a camera to a meeting.
Yeah.
Now looking back on it, I'm really proud of the thing that it's kind of all credit goes to Andrew Davies, our CMO, and Pip Piper, who's the director of the documentary. But sort of looking back on it, really proud of the thing that we've managed to put together. I think it's sort of a really interesting story. I don't think you necessarily get kind of an inside look into to doing a transaction like this, and sort of all of the ups, downs, sort of heartbreak, emotions, and things that go into it. And yeah, so I think that I definitely sort of next time I'm doing a stressful thing, probably my first reaction won't be film me. But I am.
But it should be content.
Yeah, genuinely kind of really happy with the result.
Disclosure: I've never watched Made in Chelsea or anything like that. But obviously, I'm aware of what it is. Was there anything like where you're doing a scene, or they're filming you, and they're like, okay, no, Christian, do it again, but like say this instead of that, and make it more dramatic? Were there any kind of like lines that were fed, a bit more drama added in?
We're not a reality television show, Alex. No, I think
it's a documentary, not reality TV.
No, yeah, it's definitely. I mean, there were some things where like Pip and the crew would be like, hey, we want you to like, because there's definitely like this, like we are clearly being filmed and talking to a camera.
Yeah.
But those were for like filling in context and those types of things.
Yeah, they're like an interview, like the interview
Yeah,
portion of,
totally.
of a documentary. Sure, there was like, can you explain that in more detail, or can you kind of say that again, or can you go through that? But all of the other stuff,
pretty raw.
us in meetings,
Yeah.
Zoom calls, sort of everything is pretty raw. I'd say the most interesting thing about this sort of, like, the film is sort of like half an hour or something like that. We didn't want to make it kind of too long, because obviously you definitely could make it like really long and subject people to the pain of those sort of.
It's the director's cut. It's 6 hours long.
Yeah. But it's only about half an hour long, but we probably filmed maybe sort of like tens of hours of like kind of footage and things like that. So I think one of the things we will be doing is, we probably have content now for the next year, just in terms of like a lot of those things and kind of all of the derivatives once the documentary is out, that we can create kind of behind the scenes stuff, like deep dives into specific kind of processes or things that we went through, kind of to share that with people as well. I think it's going to be really interesting for SaaS businesses and others.
Yeah.
I think there's a bunch of things that you can kind of pick up and learn. And we're also like, we don't pretend like this isn't like a TechCrunch headline. Like, we don't pretend that this was easy. We don't pretend that everything's good news in it. Sort of like, it's all very raw, and you get to see sort of the ups and downs and sort of all of the emotions that kind of go into doing something like this.
When is the documentary out?
We are screening it in person in Barcelona.
In a
couple of weeks. So we're doing a first in-person screening there, and then it will come out probably sort of digitally in mid-June sometime, and it'll be available kind of YouTube, WeSignTomorrow.com, sort of Amazon Prime, kind of all of the places you can watch stuff. It will be available.
Netflix is trying to option it right now. We're not really sure. No, I'm just kidding. It's not going to be on Netflix. But
And a final question. So Paddle and Profitwell now own the largest combined floor space at SaaStock in Dublin this year. What can we expect that you're going to do with that? We've actually
been talking about this a lot. Like, obviously we love
stuff.
We love SaaStock. We probably do have more floor space than we know what to do with. So we plan on using some of it to do something fun.
All of it will be fun.
All of it will be fun, but some of it will be sort of fun, like for the attendees, like to just sort of like hang out. Kind of, I don't know what it's going to be yet, but it will be something that you don't expect.
Depends how much budget I can get. That's really what matters. So yeah.
Because given not all of the 200 was spent on the acquisition, I think there'll be some left. We hope. But guys, thank you so much for taking time to be on the podcast. Great to have you on the show together. I love this coming together, and SaaStock playing a small part in it as well. We'll talk about the carry sort of later. But great stuff, Christian Owens and Patrick Campbell. Thanks so much for being on the SaaS Revolution Show today.
Cool. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks.